Hi guys, and welcome back to Is It Worth It Reviews. Today we are talking about CSS Criton speakers. It's a do-it-yourself kit and it's supposedly great value. So let's talk about how does it sound, how does it compare to other products, and eventually should you spend your money on this kit. If you go on the web page, you can see that the kit, like the really basic one, starts from $775 and that includes drivers, crossover parts, and no cabinets. In my case, I got so-called flat pack. It's a cabinet already built, pre-built, but it's done in a clever way. So when this cabinet is disassembled, they can pile up all of these sides to be flat and easy to ship. And that's why they call it flat pack. But assembling these is quite easy because all you have to do is to put them the proper way and glue them together. And for that, you only need to have some sort of wood clamps. I didn't have any personally, so I had to purchase those, and I've decided to go with these circular ones. I'll put some images on the screen. And two of these with some additional weight on top is enough for assembling one box. One day one box, another day another box. So it's really not that much of an investment in clamps. And you can see the prices on the web page. If you add a flat pack, I think it's $200 more, so now you're at 940, something like that. In my case, CSS sent me a version with superior crossover parts. That's like $400 more, and that means that you're getting Janssen superior caps, then Mills resistors, and really high quality air core inductors. And you get plastic boards on which you put these components. Everything is marked, all cutouts are made, you just need to put them in like a Lego and then solder the ends. And that's the only part that not maybe anybody can do. Basically anybody can solder, let's be realistic. You're just maybe not used to do that, but probably you know somebody that is, and it's like a 10-minute job. You also get base reflex port to put in the back and some spongy foamy material that's used inside the box. So everything is really well thought out. And once you finish all of that, you just need to decide what kind of finish do you want. As you can see, mine are still in plain MDF because I haven't done that final step. I haven't yet decided should I go with wood veneer or some sort of paint, but that's only about looks. They're already fully functional speakers. By the way, give me your comments down below the video. What is your favorite finish? Is it some sort of wood veneer? Which one? Or some sort of paint? But looks aside, let's shortly talk about the technology that goes into these speakers. So the base unit is 6.5 to 7 inches cone, and it is of a really high quality. The moment I took it out of the box, I saw like huge magnet, really great firm metal construction. The tweeter is, as I said, improved for this X version, and I don't know much about it except that it's a silk dome tweeter and it has really nice, refined, not aggressive at all sound. Now, once assembled, the official sensitivity rating is 87 dB. And here I have to say that I think that's a little bit overestimated, because in my experience, just comparing it with several other speakers, I feel that it's lower than that. These feel less sensitive, maybe 84, 85 dB. I don't have a way to measure these, it's just how it realistically feels to me when compared to other speakers that are declared to be 85, 86, 87. These are a little bit less sensitive. That's not really problematic, it's just something that I wanted you to know, and it means that you need a decently powered amplifier to drive these. Now, all of that out of the way, how do these speakers actually sound? Well, to start with their overall tonality, CSS Criton 1TD-X sound very full-bodied, juicy, authoritative, but slightly darker up top. So if we are talking about those higher frequencies, they are really clean and detail retrieval is great. So overall clarity and cleanliness is definitely great. You have deep dark background and then precise, clean, high-frequency tones coming out from that darkness, and you can hear everything that's happening in the recording. But the overall level and forwardness of those high frequencies is more on a slightly laid-back side of things, and it's just not something that you notice when you start listening to these speakers. It's not the first thing to pop in your mind. Then the upper mid-range is quite the same as I just explained for the highs. It's very clean, it's very resolving, but kinda laid back, and upper mid-range is that presence region. That's that part that can give the sensation of a really forward tone, but because of it, sometimes vocals can sound too hot. For example, my voice, that is quite sibilant, no matter how good microphone I use, you can hear that I have these strong S's. And if speakers have prominent that upper mid-range part, that's even more noticeable. But not with CSS here, because that upper mid-range part and highs are kinda laid back and slightly darker. And then moving even lower to the lower mid-range and mid-bass and bass, those are really full, present, authoritative, and that kind of tuning gives a great full bodiness and palpability to all tones. To all vocals, like male vocals with deep, chesty sound to them, they feel really big and solid. And then all instruments that have that deeper core of a tone, like acoustic guitars, double bass, a cello, or anything like that, that has higher tones, but also that deeper chambery feeling that really sounds deep, full and present, palpable in space because of this beefy lower mid-range, mid-bass and bass. And then dynamics are really good too. These speakers have good kick, they have good punch, and they have really decent scale for such small speakers. And I know this phrase have been used so many times for so many speakers, but these really do sound bigger than they are because of that kind of tuning and that deep bass. For such a small speaker, they do sound bold and big and authoritative. But there is a small price to pay for that. You see, the physics of building speakers works like that. If you want to have deep bass, which these speakers have, and if you want it to be high in level, comparable to high frequencies, you can only do that by attenuating higher frequencies and lowering sensitivity of speaker. And that's why every time you hear that a small speaker has great bass extension and bass grunt, the sensitivity has to suffer to some degree. And you do notice that with these speakers. They're a little bit less sensitive than average. You need to have like powerful, strong amp that can drive these cones to move and that can control them to stop after that movement, so the bass doesn't get bloated and uncontrolled. But once you provide that good power and good control, these really sound big and powerful and authoritative. And I think that's a really good compromise, because if you have small, high sensitivity speakers, not much bass, and if you're not okay with that, the only way you can solve it is by adding a subwoofer. And that raises the cost, it raises the complexity of your whole system, the integration. These do not need a subwoofer, unless you're really all about those 20-25 Hz, because in an average size room, like mine is, you can definitely get pretty decently loud 35 Hz from these. Now the last part before I go to comparisons, sound staging of CSS Criton is pretty good, and it's especially good when it comes to soundstage depth. Once you give them a little bit space from the back wall, these can create really nice and good soundstage depth. and everything inside of that soundstage is pinpointed with great precision and great layering. Soundstage width is just decent, normal, it's not really huge, but that's kind of expected because soundstage depth comes mostly from the lower frequencies, because it's how physics and our sensation of depth works. We register low frequencies that are traveling far away, then they're reflecting from something and coming back to us. Reverbs create that sensation too, and these can do that great because they have great bass rendering. But the soundstage width and height, sensation of that air around instruments, comes from like really open and dispersed high frequencies, and CSS being slightly darker doesn't do that as well. It's quite decent, don't get me wrong, but it's just not at the same level as the soundstage depth. And this actually leads me to comparisons. First one I did is with my KEF LS50 speakers. It's not the newer meta version, but the older, the original ones, OGs. I don't use these anymore, but I keep them around for these exact purposes, to have a familiar reference that most of you know or heard at some point in your life, so I can do these kind of comparisons. And when I hooked up KEF LS50 into my system, first thing that I noticed is that it's definitely more open and more present in this upper mid-range and high frequencies. And I listened to some song along the lines of just a female vocal and nice acoustic instruments, not much dynamics, not much deep tones, something like this, for example. I really loved this song, it's a great song. And at that moment, my first impression was, wow, KEF LS50 might actually sound a little bit airier and richer with that girl's vocal. But that first impression is misleading, because as soon as you move to any different music genre or any different song, it's enough to have just a male vocal instead of this higher female one, where there's more chestiness. And you'll notice that LS50 actually sounds shallower. It doesn't have that deep chestiness and pulpability, and that physical pulpability of a vocal in your room as CSS. But it does have that upper frequencies presence, it pushes that, emphasizes that more, and it can sound more impressive in certain songs and with female vocals. But the more genres I listened to, anything, as I said, with male vocals, with deeper sounding instruments like double bass, drums, electronic music, rock music, I've noticed that CSS actually sounds more wholesome. It's simply fuller, it's more physical, it has greater punch, and it's even cleaner sounding. Tones like mid-bass and mid-range are more precise, they bloom a little bit less compared to LS50, and everything sounds a little bit cleaner with a darker background, and the sound staging is even deeper. CSS has that darker, deeper background and then cleaner tones just emerging from that darkness, and generally speaking more laid back mid-range and highs and presentation, more laid back spatially speaking, whereas LS50 is more aggressive, more forward. But in terms of dynamics, it's flatter, it's not as dynamic. In terms of bass line, it doesn't go nearly as deep as CSS, and it doesn't have the same grunt and the same punch and fullness. And because of that, CSS does sound more three-dimensional, cleaner, with a darker background, and just more wholesome, fuller bodied, juicier. So in my mind, I have to say that CSS Criton, after listening to different music genres for a longer time, is simply a more complete product, better sounding product, and I would rather listen to this than KEF LS50s. If I was still actively using LS50s, which I did for some 4 years or something like that, I would definitely switch to CSS at this moment after this review. And I didn't have those for a direct comparison, but I heard like Bowers & Wilkins Series 7 and 6 many times and monitor audios, silvers and golds. And I have to say focals too, and I have to say that all of these speakers are brighter sounding, more aggressive, more forward sounding, but not as full-bodied, as clean and as smooth as CSS. For example, Bowers & Wilkins Series 7 is quite aggressive and unrefined compared to these. And it doesn't have the same soundstage depth and just that same cleanliness and smoothness that CSS has. And one last comparison that I know many of you would ask for is against my own do-it-yourself build. I did a review for that kit and how I did it. The speaker is called Spirit Wind, and I checked how much would it cost at the moment to make because of the inflation and everything happening. I paid for those parts maybe a year and a half ago. So I checked now, and even though that build cost me $2,000 at the time, nowadays it would be more than 2,500, maybe 2,700, something like that. Which makes it twice the price, basically, of this superior high-end version of CSS Criton that I have here. And that project is also higher in difficulty because you do not get Flatpak for boxes. You have to build them yourself or hire somebody to build them for you. And they have 5 degrees incline and are in general more difficult to make. So having that in mind, how did they compare? Well, I don't want to beat around the bushes here. I'll say that Spirit Wind does sound better. Some things are equal, for example, baseline extension and how deep it goes. Both are phenomenal on both of these speakers. The CSS Criton is actually the only one that I've heard so far that can go as deep and be as grunty as Spirit Wind. But there's a slight difference there too. CSS is slightly warmer and fuller sounding in the mid-bass and bass, whereas Spirit Wind is quicker and grippier. But in terms of extension, they're pretty much equal. But the biggest difference is actually when we start moving up the frequency range, where Spirit Winds do sound more open and slightly more resolving. Spirit Winds have bigger, wider sound dispersion in those higher frequencies. And because of that, soundstage width and the sensation of height is definitely bigger with Spirit Winds, and you feel like there's more air around the instruments, that atmosphere, like the sunshine is being lit on your soundstage, where CSS actually sound laid back and darker compared to that. Now both of these are silk dome tweeters. There is no aggressiveness in any of these, but Spirit Winds do create bigger sound stage and they are brighter, airier sounding, and they're also a little bit more dynamic. Now CSS Criton is no slouch in that regard. It's a really dynamic speaker, but Spirit Winds are a little bit livelier and they do these dynamic swings a little bit easier. They just feel more eager and jumpy to do those. So, as I said, no sense of beating around the bush here. I definitely preferred Spirit Wind, but that doesn't say anything bad about CSS Criton, because they are, at their best, half the price of Spirit Wind build. And it's an easier, more user-friendly build with Lego-like crossovers, with pre-cut Flatpak cabinets that you just glue together. So it's easier to build, it's easier on your wallet, and it does sound really, really good. Better than any commercial speaker at that price that I've personally heard. And that, in my eyes, makes these CSS speakers a great value. They're clean, they're resolving, they're full and wholesome sounding, in a way that you definitely don't need a subwoofer with these. You can add it if you're a bass head, but you don't need it like you would need with KEF LS50s and many Bowers & Wilkins and Focal speakers. You don't need with these. Which actually leads me to a recommendation about pairing. I wouldn't pair these with darker sounding gear, such as Raga Brio amp, for example. That one does not have, first of all, it doesn't have enough power to wake up these properly. Second of all, it's too dark, it's too juicy and fatty already. That would be a combination that I wouldn't be happy with. But something like Atoll in one integrated amplifier that I reviewed here on this channel. It's very powerful and authoritative amp with great slam, with great bass control, and then very open and resolving and airy upper frequencies. And price-wise, it matches these speakers really nice. That combo would provide you with the sound fidelity that knocks on the door of like high-endish entry. Not really, but you know, you would get a good taste of what high-end really sounds like. I heard speakers sounding like $4,000 and $5,000 that are not really any better than these CSS. They do some things differently, they're tonally different, but not better. So if you don't mind putting a little bit of effort, a little bit of work, not much really, assembling these yourself, you can even choose the finish, you will get a mighty sounding speaker. And then if you pair it well, like that's it. Like 99.9% of normal people could end their hi-fi journey with that kind of sound. And with that, it's time to finish today's review. Thank you for watching and see you next time. Bye.